Good afternoon, everybody. This is Congressman Mike Levin. Thank you, as always, for joining us for another virtual town hall where we'll be talking about COVID-19 and a number of other issues. I'm very grateful to have two great guests. Sudershan Shaunak, he's the director of the North San Diego Small Business Development Center, and he's actually located, headquartered in Miracosta College, right in our district. Very grateful for his being here to talk about small business issues. And then, of course, our dear friend who's back again, Dr. Karl Steinberg, and very grateful for Karl. For those tuning in for the first time, he really is a great public health expert. Just to briefly introduce them both, Sudershan has been the director of the North County SBDC since 2003. And he's a management accountant with 45 years. How is that possible? You look way too young to have 45 years of experience in business. He's a serial entrepreneur with expertise in strategic planning, financing, financial management, business expansion and growth, turnaround, and startups. And this has been a crazy time, no question, for our small businesses. So we'll be looking forward to hearing more from you. And Dr. Steinberg is a leading nursing home facility and hospice medical director, really a great leader in North County. His undergraduate degree from Harvard, his graduate degree, Ohio State University, the Ohio State University College of Medicine. I can't screw that up. And his family medicine residency locally here at UC San Diego. Grateful to you both. And Dr. Steinberg, I checked, and this is your 10th virtual town hall that you've done with us. We've actually done 31 of them all told since the middle of March. This is your 10th. So I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to educate our constituents here in the 49th. And we just appreciate you both so much. And this has been a very difficult time. Make no mistake. I think we all know that. Very sadly, we've passed the 138,000 mark in terms of deaths from COVID-19. We see the numbers and now know the recent actions by Governor Newsom related to the rise in infection, both throughout our Orange and San Diego County communities. I'm deeply concerned, obviously, to see this. I've said all along and will continue to say that we cannot have a healthy economy without healthy people. So we must do all we can to get this virus under control. In particular, I've been concerned with the rising rate of infection in Orange County, really in both counties, but I was just checking, and the recent positivity rate of those who have been tested in Orange County is hovering at around 12%. In San Diego, it's been at around 7%. I was very concerned, though, to read over the weekend in the San Diego Union Tribune about potential for rationing of COVID tests, that we don't have enough supplies. I mean, you'd think 7 months into this, we would have figured out the supply chain enough to be able to have sufficient supplies. But look, we have unfortunately had a lack of federal leadership that has led to our states being pitted against one another in many cases to be able to procure these necessary supplies, whether they be swabs or reagents. I am, though, very happy to see all the development around the vaccine. And I'm also mindful that Congress does need to take additional action, which we've been saying now for going on 2 months. You know, if you go back to the beginning of March, our first bill on COVID-19, we had $8 billion for the vaccine. And think about how important that has been. We're now, months later, we've got scores of companies working. Some are already in clinical trials. I really hope that we're going to be able to get through those clinical trials as quickly as possible. And I know we're going to be speaking to Dr. Steinberg about that. With cases spiking on Monday, Governor Newsom called for new targeted closures in, I believe, 30 counties, and that included both San Diego and Orange counties. Those targeted closures included bars, movie theaters, wineries, zoos, museums, and under other indoor gathering spaces. San Diego and Orange County also need to close fitness centers, places of worship, salons, malls, and other non-essential offices. And Governor Newsom has referred to a sort of dimmer switch. I can tell you, just today I had my most recent conversation with our North County, San Diego mayors. We're all very concerned by what we're seeing and also the impact it's having on our small businesses, which is why it's so important that we have SBDC here and the impact on our community at large. Obviously, a lot of people are struggling right now, and we have to make sure that we do everything we can to follow those steps that we know will help prevent community spread. Wear a mask, prioritize outdoor venues, keep your 6 feet social distance, wash your hands frequently, do all the other things that we know will work, and do them out of respect for your fellow human beings and because they're the right thing to do. And if we do all those things, it's going to help us get back on our feet far sooner than otherwise would be the case. In fact, I just saw an estimate this morning that suggests, based on some of the different models, that we'll now have over 220,000 deaths by the beginning of November. But the projections are if we do wear masks and we do follow those other guidelines, we can save 40,000 lives, is what I literally just read. So this is in our hands, by and large. We can do this if we work together and if we show each other the best of what brings us together in our communities, which is respect for one another and just common sense and common decency. Back to what we've done in Congress. I think you probably, if you've watched any of these, you're familiar with a lot of this, but we passed the CARES Act back at the end of March, and it included a ton of different things. $2.2 trillion bill included the first tranche for the Paycheck Protection Program, and I know we're going to be speaking about that, the direct cash assistance of up to $1,200 per person, and the expanded unemployment insurance, which runs out at the end of July. The PPP program, people can still apply for it through August the 8th due to the PPP extension that we passed recently, the last time I was in DC. I can tell you I'll be going back to Washington on Sunday, and my great hope is that we will have a fifth COVID recovery package. We passed the HEROES Act in the House now going on 2 months ago. We sent that bill to Mitch McConnell and to the Senate, and it was an 1,800-page bill. There was a lot in there, but my expectation is not that McConnell will agree with every word or every page, but that he will come up and the Senate will come up with a proposal that actually meets the challenges that we face. Based on what I'm hearing, I am somewhat skeptical, yet I think in our line of work, you have to be a card-carrying optimist. And my great hope is that we can come to some sort of agreement with COVID recovery package number 5. And look, we've got a ton that we've got to sort out. The president and Betsy DeVos, Secretary of Education, they're pressuring the schools to reopen. Well, in our bill, in the HEROES Act, we included tens of billions of dollars directly for that purpose to help get those schools reopened. I think we all want to reopen safely to the extent that we can. Having 2 young children, my wife and I, we have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, and we're very concerned that we reopen in a safe manner, safe for the students, safe for the teachers, safe for all that work at these schools, and safe for the families that are desperate in need of trying to get their kids quality and reliable educations and childcare. So we're all mindful of that. We mentioned the PPP program. I can tell you that the PPP program has really been a mixed bag, and I think we can talk more about it. But I've been encouraged that in our district, new data from the SBA informed us that the PPP helped sustain 20,456 small businesses in our district. So clearly you hear the negative stories about some businesses that got PPP funds that really didn't need the money. But we also have to be mindful when you have that many small businesses in our district alone, those businesses support over 241,000 employees. More than $613 million in federal stimulus funding to small businesses has been deployed in our congressional district. And while I'm thrilled so many businesses were assisted, I do want to again reiterate the need for us to continue to push for better and more improved oversight for this program. We've tried to make changes and fixes as we've gone, but we need far better oversight. In addition to that, I think it's critically important, having just spoken with our mayors from North County, San Diego earlier today, that we don't forget about the provisions in the HEROES Act for state and local governments. There was $875 billion in the HEROES Act for our state and local governments. About $300 million would come to the cities of the 49th district. I was honored that all 9 of the mayors, Republicans and Democrats alike from our district, signed a letter saying we need those funds here in our district, not just for direct COVID-related expenses, but also lost revenue. We need to be able to recover that revenue. The transit occupancy taxes are way down. Obviously, our cities are struggling as a result, and we have to make sure that we do right to try to hopefully help them from the worst of this pandemic. Also, testing. I feel like we've said this straight through, but for me, it is unbelievable that here we are several months into this pandemic, and we still lack a comprehensive national testing strategy. We required it in one of our bills at the end of May, that by May 24th, the administration would provide us with a national testing strategy. They provided us with a document. It was around 80 pages, but it was basically a pat on the back to themselves for the things that they had done and punting many of the major decisions around supply chain to the states. Simply unacceptable. And I think it's very, very, very important that we have enough testing and enough contact tracing to try to prevent further community spread, to try to reinstill that public confidence that people need to be able to get back out there again and to know that they can do so safely. That's critically important. I wanted to now very briefly, before we move on, turn to our friend from the SBDC, Sudershan. Do you want to speak specifically about some of the impact of COVID-19 on the small business community, the Paycheck Protection Program, or anything else specifically related to your work at SBDC? And thank you again for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Congressman. And of course, a pleasure addressing all the people who are on this town hall. Yes, Congressman, you talked about a healthy economy. And that's what we are involved with as an SBDC. The Small Business Development Center is the federal government's largest resource program designed to help improve the managerial skills of small businesses so they may deliver a positive economic impact in the community. So this program has been around for about 40 years. And here, fortunately, in the San Diego Imperial County area, we have 8 centers. We're part of a network. And I just want to share with you that during this pandemic, we've been able to help a lot of people because times are tough. Small businesses need guidance. Not only did they need funding to be able to sustain themselves for a period of time, but down the road, they're going to need funding and assistance from the SBDC so they could pivot and rethink their business as to how they're going to be able to move forward. So all the services that are provided by the SBDC are provided by expert business advisors who have either owned businesses or own businesses and have the academic background to go with it. So they can provide not only training, but also individualized, customized counseling and mentoring to help overcome the obstacles that any of these small businesses face. And once we've identified those obstacles, we can work together on finding a solution for them. So specifically talking about the CARES Act and how that has helped, our network alone has in our area here helped small businesses get almost $90 million in PPP and EIDL loans. And the EIDL loans are still coming because there was a long pipeline for that. So I do want to share something very specifically about these particular loans and urge everybody who's listening in, if you have not taken advantage of these 2 loan programs, the EIDL and the PPP program, that's still open there. But with the PPP program, like the Congressman said, the window is short now. This program is extended through August the 8th. But all the banks that are accepting applications on this are probably going to cut it off by the 24th or at the most the 27th of this month. So another 8-10 days is pretty much all that the banks have available to get these loans in and get them approved. So I do want to share that the EIDL loan, that is totally open right now. The only thing that's gone on it is the up to $10,000 advance that was forgivable. So in the new iteration now, that segment is gone. But the EIDL loan itself can be a $2 million loan with a 30-year term and interest at a pretty fair rate of 3.75%, with the payment being deferred for 1 year, even though the interest accrues from day one from the date the loan funds. And the important thing about this particular EIDL loan program is directly from the Treasury through the SBA. No banks are involved in it. So, and any loan that is up to $25,000 does not have to be secured. So please take advantage of that opportunity. It's still out there. And as far as the PPP program is concerned, Yes, and it's available to any for-profit or non-profit organizations. And this program is being run through the banks. And there are many banks that are still doing this. And I would urge any sole proprietors, independent contractors, any small businesses to please go ahead and apply for it. I will share with you, Congressman, and maybe people can get access to our website so they can go and reach out to us. So we are located at Miracosta College. These programs are very good, particularly the PPP program, because while it's a loan program, a significant portion of it can be forgiven if at least 60% of the funds are used for payroll and the remaining 40% are used for eligible costs, which are essentially rent and utilities and interest on business mortgages. So take advantage of that. We are at the SBDC have the expertise to be able to help and guide you through that process, right? So there are additional programs also both at the city and state and the county level. And I think we're flush with a lot of different programs and grants at this point in time. So it's almost overwhelming. Do reach out to the SBDC and we can try and find you the best fit. Just one word of caution, you are not allowed to double dip. If you use a particular fund or expense over a defined time period, make sure you do not claim it against another assistance program for the coronavirus pandemic. So one of the most important things to know, please, is understand that we at the SBDC provide mentoring and advice and training to move you to the next phase. And in these particular times, I think it's important that everybody rethinks how they're going to survive and come out of this plan. So we will guide you to put together a lean business plan. It doesn't have to be anything too complicated, pages and pages, but a very lean business plan. And also look into government contracting. That is one area that small businesses could have an advantage in. The government has not stopped spending. That particular consumer is still out there, and we at the SBDC can help you do whatever it is that you need to do. And finally, as you move out of this pandemic or are still in it, one way to stay connected with your clients and re-engage with them is to use a good CRM system. So we will be working with you folks and giving you marketing guidance so that you can take advantage and use efficient ways to be able to reconnect with and stay connected with your clients. So with that, we'll take any questions later on, Congressman, but I just wanted to give a brief outline of what the SBDC does.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for all your good work on behalf of our small businesses. We do have a number of questions that you'll want to stick around for, so thank you again. Before we get back to COVID and to your questions, I did want to give a few other legislative updates. I'm really proud that at the end of June, we released our select committee report called our Climate Crisis Action Plan. I'm one of the 3 freshmen on the select committee for the climate crisis. This was a bold and comprehensive report, 538 pages. If you're interested, even in reading the summary, you can go to climatecrisis.house.gov and you can read the report. And I was really proud of the robust nature of the report. We had dozens of responses to actually 700 responses to a public request for information that helped inform the final report, 17 hearings, over 1,000 member and staff meetings, and high-level goals set the United States on a path to achieve net zero carbon pollution by at least 2050, save over 60,000 lives per year due to reduced air pollution, save nearly $8 trillion by 2050, not including the cost of energy savings, zero net carbon from the power sector by 2040, zero emission vehicles across the board for new car sales by 2035. So very bold, very ambitious. I'm really proud of the fact that 7 of my bills made it in to the final report, which was a great victory. We were very proud of that. And I think this plan is really going to not only help our environment and our global leadership, but also our economy. We have a great opportunity now to create the clean energy jobs of the future and to meet this moment with millions and millions of Americans out of work. We can go bold on green infrastructure, on the clean energy jobs of the future. We can lead the world on these issues again, and I hope we do. We also passed H.R. 2, the Moving Forward Act. It is a $1.5 trillion infrastructure overhaul. And look, I would love to see the administration work with us. Again, as I said about the HEROES Act, I don't expect for the administration or the Senate to agree with every word or every page of what we've proposed, but we have put that proposal out there affirmatively, proactively, boldly, and let's work together. Let's get something done for the American people. In this case, for our infrastructure to create jobs, and it's long past time that we make that robust investment in our nation's infrastructure. And that's what this bill would do. And in fact, I was really proud that it included a number of my legislative ideas in there, such as our Public Land Renewable Energy Development Act, a truly bipartisan bill to create 25 gigawatts of new renewable energy on our public lands. I was also very pleased that $3.4 billion of VA infrastructure upgrades across the thousands of VA facilities throughout our country were included in that bill as well. And another bill that is really exciting related to our public lands and the environment is permanent funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. If you're like me, you care a lot about our national parks. They're an extraordinary treasure. And I hope that I'm able to take my kids, they can take their kids, and they can take their kids to our amazing national parks throughout our nation. And the LWCF is long overdue to be funded, and this would permanently fund it. It would also create billions of dollars for addressing the backlog, the maintenance backlog in our national parks. So I think this is something that hopefully Teddy Roosevelt would be proud. And Franklin Roosevelt, for that matter, would be proud. All the great champions of our national parks. And I'm really happy that we were able to work together with our colleagues in the Senate and get this done. Speaking of our veterans, there are two bills that I wanted to mention. I'm going to mention both of them because I think they have a great shot at becoming law. And we've been really privileged to work as chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee, Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity to help get these done. First is called the Homeless Veteran Coronavirus Response Act. Second is called the Veterans Economic Recovery Act. The homelessness crisis within the veteran population continues to get worse with the pandemic. And what our bill would do is free up a lot of the resources at the VA for them to be able to serve veterans who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless, who otherwise currently do not have access to those services. Many times it's due to their discharge status or for other reasons, but this will free up a lot of those existing resources and will help make it easier for the VA to partner with the nonprofit community to address homelessness. The second, the economic response, the numbers are very sad. The veteran unemployment rate has gone from about 3%, which was excellent, all the way now up to about 12%, 13%. And that's really tragic because in my mind, every veteran that served their country ought to be able to find a great job. So what our bill does is it creates a 12-month rapid retraining program, again, bipartisan, bicameral bill for those most high-demand occupations. And I'm really hopeful that that bill will get over the finish line and signed into law in the weeks ahead. And just last week, I introduced other legislation to strengthen the Transition Assistance Program, the TAP program, to provide counseling pathways for service members returning from service and ensure they have the economic support that they need to return to civilian life. I'd also like to mention work that we're doing around policing and reform. I had a great opportunity the other day to bring together our local law enforcement leaders and our local civil rights leaders for a productive dialogue, actually out in Miracosta College. We did it outside, and I thought it was a great conversation. I think we're already doing a lot in our local communities to really lead the way, but I do hope that we're able during this difficult period to make sure that the deaths of George Floyd and others did not happen in vain, and that we are up to the moment and we are going to meet this moment with the bold and comprehensive reforms that we need. So I was honored to co-sponsor and then help pass in the House the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, a very bold policing reform bill. And then in the Senate, Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina also passed a bill. My great hope is that we're going to continue working together to get something done. And I've been encouraged that Karen Bass, who's the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus and a dear friend, continues to have a productive dialogue with Senator Tim Scott. I do hope that they work together and that George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, countless others who tragically lost their lives are not forgotten. They cannot be forgotten. And so we're going to keep that pressure up for hearings and to hopefully get to some sort of bipartisan, bicameral bill that we can be proud of. Finally, I wanted to mention, and I have it here, our San Onofre Task Force developed a comprehensive report. I'm extremely proud of this work. Many of you know that right in the middle of our congressional district, we've got 1,600 tons of spent nuclear fuel sitting on the beach, literally 100 feet away from the Pacific Ocean. We've got to do everything we can to get that waste moved as quickly and as safely as possible. And in that report, which you can see online, I'm really proud of the work of the task force. It was chaired by the former head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and a retired Navy admiral. They co-chaired it. They came up with 30 recommendations, of which about 8 have a strong federal nexus, and we're going to move forward aggressively on all of those. The first one we've already begun, which is called the Spent Fuel Prioritization Act, which says for all those sites across the country where you have spent nuclear fuel, prioritize moving the waste first from areas of the highest population density and the highest seismic risk. And not surprisingly, we finish at the very top of those two rankings with 9 million people within 50 miles of San Onofre and active earthquake faults as well. So we're going to keep working very hard on songs and everything else. Local environmental issues have been critically important. Getting the $300 million to help clean up cross-border pollution at the Tijuana River Valley, getting $11.5 million for the Del Mar Bluffs. I'll be having another meeting with the folks that are stakeholders for the Del Mar Bluffs this afternoon. Working with our friends for the Encinitas and Solana Beach shoreline protection and the San Clemente shoreline protection and the Oceanside coastal preservation. All those issues are so incredibly important, and we're going to keep working with our friends, with the Army Corps of Engineers and all of our stakeholders in the months and years ahead. So with that, I am pleased to welcome back for the 10th time to talk about COVID-19 and to answer your public health questions this week, Dr. Karl Steinberg. Karl, it's great to see you, my friend. And if you could begin by taking a snapshot for us of where we are with COVID-19 and how we wound up here and what we need to do next.
Great. Thanks, Congressman. I'm just wondering, with all this amazing work you're doing on so many fronts, the energy and Veterans Affairs, I'm just wondering when you sleep. But
I get my 6 hours. I'm good, Karl.
Wow, I envy you that. Well, anyway, thank you for having me back. Yeah, wow, double digits. I'd be like one of those Saturday Night Live hosts. I'd probably get a special jacket or something like that. So
it's on the way. It's on the way.
I'll be on the lookout. Yeah, you hit a lot of the points I was going to mention. It's embarrassing, but we are actually in the place where we were several months ago, where testing has become an issue again. Seems like we could have planned ahead a little better. Unfortunately, it seems that we didn't. And so, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later. I think we have some questions about it, but they're not doing wholesale testing of asymptomatic people in the way that we were recommending over the last several weeks. And it's taking a lot longer to get the tests back because the labs are sort of on overload. So that's really unfortunate. And particularly during a time when we're seeing an increase in community spread, both in Orange County and in San Diego County. The death rate is hovering around a little bit over 1% of total cases that die. That's pretty bad. It's a lot worse than influenza. And that doesn't really account for the other severe illness and long-term sequelae. Most people who recover from influenza get pretty much back to baseline, whereas COVID seems to cause a lot of long-term problems of various body systems. So that's unfortunate. But it is a step in the right direction in the sense that that death rate in our country had been as high as 7.5%. So I think we are learning how to treat it better. And in particular, not put people on ventilators as quickly as we were, just based on the numbers that their oxygen level were at, but more looking at the whole picture. So I guess that's something that's relatively positive. The deaths are trending upward again, though. So, we had 160 deaths in California yesterday, higher than any other state. It's been as low as 20. So I guess the short version is we're nowhere near the end of the tunnel. I don't think we can see the light at the end of the tunnel yet. It's going to be a long tunnel, unfortunately. And so we just need to stay hunkered down. About schools, I noticed that San Diego and LA County decided to hold off on in-person school for the time being. Orange County didn't. I guess I can let you comment on that. I think putting a bunch of kids together in school, even with precautions that are going to be expensive and difficult to implement, they're going to bring it home, and it's going to, if they live with grandma or their dad is a smoker or whatever, that's going to cause some problems. And I think it's risky, and I certainly wouldn't be advising it, in spite of all the reasons why we would want kids to be able to go back to in-person school. I've continued to be concerned about the anti-science rhetoric, kind of just disgusted. I don't know how else to say it, at the smears of Anthony Fauci, who is an amazing scientist and public servant who's devoted 40 years to things like trying to find a cure for AIDS. And to me is beyond reproach. And, to have these kind of digs at his credibility, I just find it super disturbing. You may have also heard that I guess the federal government has decided that they will handle the COVID data and that the CDC won't be handling it. And I don't know. I just hope that kind of stuff changes before too long. I guess that's all I really need to say about that. On a positive note, the federal government, or CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, has announced that they're going to supply all nursing homes with these rapid point of care antigen tests for COVID. And they're starting with the first 2,000 out of about 15,000 nursing homes nationwide in the next couple of weeks. I'll believe it when I see it, but I think it's a great idea because nowadays you get a test and maybe a week later you get the results, and by then it's not a very efficient system. So I hope it's true, and I'm cautiously optimistic that will actually come to pass. And on a not so positive note, just as far as the vaccine issue, there's tons of research going on, right? Over 125 vaccines that are being frantically studied right now. And they just did have some good early data that one of the vaccines does create antibodies, and in basically 100% of the small sample, several dozen test subjects. The question we have, though, is how long will that confer immunity, and to what extent will it? Because as you know, you get a flu shot, it doesn't necessarily mean you won't get the flu, but usually it means you won't get as severe a flu as you would have if you hadn't had the vaccine. So anyway, that's something else where we're nowhere near. I mean, there's no light at the end of that tunnel. It's relatively positive news, and I hope that we have more of that to come. But I'm not holding my breath for the vaccine. Although when it becomes available and approved, I'll be the first in line to get it. So anyway, that's enough out of me, and thank you.
Well, thank you, Doctor. I couldn't agree with you more about playing politics with CDC data. It's just crazy. And I also want to commend Dr. Fauci. He briefed us in Congress all the way back in February, and he's been remarkably consistent throughout, and really, I think, has tried to provide science-based, evidence-based advice. And I hope that we can get through that political noise and spend more time listening to him and perhaps less time on Twitter. But in addition to that, you brought up the Orange County schools. I think it's important to know that the Orange County Board of Education made that recommendation, but the school districts themselves in Orange County are not bound to that decision. In fact, a number of them have already decided not to follow those recommendations. And I believe tonight in our district, we've got Capistrano Unified. I think they're making their decisions this evening. And I'll be watching closely because my wife and I have our 8-year-old and 6-year-old in those schools. And I think we all want safely reopen schools. We want to make sure that to the extent that schools want to reopen, they've got the resources to do it right. And we know it's going to take millions and millions and millions, really at a macro level, billions of dollars to reopen schools safely. So it's sort of like Andrew Cuomo said about the states being held responsible. If you're going to pass the buck, you better pass the bucks. And just the same for our schools. If they're going to be expected to reopen safely, they're going to need the resources to do it. An unfunded mandate makes no sense. We have a lot of questions, and we will get through as many of them as we can. I thank all of our viewers for providing these questions. First one is from Mark in Carlsbad. From Mark in Carlsbad. Do you believe it should be the highest priority to set up testing for as much of the population as quickly as possible to find who has COVID-19 virus in their body? Yes, we ought to be testing as many people as we can. It means we have to be consistent with the science, and the epidemiologists from the get-go, Harvard and others, have said 152 tests per 100,000 people per day. We need to do everything we can to meet that, and also the number of contact tracers commensurate with what science advises is also very smart. We passed legislation, as I mentioned in the intro, that required a national testing strategy to be provided to the Congress, but it really was very weak what they actually did provide. The HEROES Act, it includes another tranche of funds for our testing, a long list of things in there, but $75 billion for a robust contact tracing and testing program across the country. And the bottom line, again, is we need adequate testing if we're going to reopen safely. Can't have a healthy economy unless you've got healthy people. So that's what we need to do. And to a certain degree, it seems like the White House has sort of given up on this. You know, you hear the president at his rally in Tulsa say, slow the testing down, and then hedge on whether that was a joke or not a joke. And I don't think, that was the right message at all. I think we have to do everything we can. And I'm doubly concerned when I see articles, as I mentioned, like the one in the Union Tribune recently, where it said we have to ration testing in San Diego because they lack adequate supplies. So this is deeply, deeply troubling, and something that I'll be continuing to fight on. And then Orange County as well. We've had real problems with regard to the testing relative to other counties. And they've played up their testing capacity, but they haven't really been administering those tests as they should have. And maybe things would have not been as bad as they are right now had more tests been administered throughout April, May, and on into June. So, I think, unfortunately, as Dr. Steinberg said, we've been at this a number of months. It would be really nice if we were further along than we are, and if we'd ramped up testing better than we have, but that's where we are. Stephen Oceanside asks, shouldn't dentists go back to emergency-only procedures in light of the current situation? Dr. Steinberg.
Yeah, Steve, that's certainly something that dentists' offices probably should be considering. Although I do think that in most dental offices, they observe meticulous PPE and disinfection procedures and so on. But personally, considering the recent increase in community spread and just the more cases that we have in our communities here in San Diego and Orange County, I personally would not go in for a dental cleaning or any kind of exam or elective dental work right now. Just as at this point, I'm not willing to go into a hair salon, considering what's been going on lately. So certainly if I were a person in a high risk group, a smoker, somebody with pulmonary disease or diabetes, I would think long and hard about going to the dentist if there's not a specific problem going on. So that would be my advice. I don't think that's been mandated yet, and I'm not sure if it will be, but I think there's certainly a risk there. And they're working right in your mouth, and it's a risk in both directions, I suppose.
Thank you for that. Patricia in Oceanside says or asks, what are you going to do for those seniors who were still in the workforce to pay their bills but cannot work now due to COVID-19? Well, I know there are a lot of people in that category, and they're at higher risk. I think in addition to the traditional unemployment benefits, we did include the pandemic emergency unemployment compensation. That's the additional 13 weeks. But the 13 weeks are coming and going, and we know that we're going to have to take additional action. And I think your question is a perfect illustration of why that is. So one of my priorities has been to extend the unemployment eligibility. We can debate, and there are very well-intentioned folks who believe that the expanded unemployment, to the extent that we've had that, has created a disincentive. But I think we've got to just meet the moment and be responsive to the facts that we see on the ground, which are stories like yours. The HEROES Act would continue the unemployment through January 31 of next year. But I'll keep calling on the Senate to mark our bill up, and we'll see what they come up with next week. Daniel in Carlsbad asks, as owner of a small home care services business, and you hear small business, so I'm going to be calling on our friend from the SBDC in a minute. As owner of a small home care services business, I have struggled to get my workforce to come back to work. With the extra $600 a week in unemployment insurance, they can make more money staying home. And many have told us as such. Where do you stand on continuing that program after July 31st, and what alternatives are being discussed? Well, I understand that challenge. As I just mentioned, I've heard that a number of times from a number of different people. And I think when we passed the CARES Act, the idea was to provide immediate relief to millions of people who were going to be without a job. And I'm still very concerned about the millions of people who are without a job. And that's why I thought that federal bonus was necessary. I think that we're going to have hopefully a productive bipartisan bicameral dialogue in the weeks ahead on what we do next. But make no mistake, this is not a time for us to take our foot off the gas. Our small businesses are still really struggling out there and need assistance. And Sudershan, maybe you wanted to speak a little bit more about what you think is needed out there.
I think, thank you, Congressman. I think, it's certainly important that to have a healthy economy, that people have to believe they're going to stay healthy while working in that economy. So when people come back to work, I think it's appropriate that small businesses have additional resources, which then they can use to offset additional payroll expenses. I think a continuation of the PPP type program would be, I think, a good way to go about it. Of course, the unemployment insurance is a good thing, but when I talk to many small business owners, one of the concerns that they've had is that people are making more money sitting at home rather than coming to work, even if that workplace itself is providing a reasonably safe work environment. So it is a challenge, and it's something that needs to be discussed certainly further. Funding is needed. How exactly it's funneled through is the conversation that needs to be had.
Thank you for that. Melanie in San Marcos has a follow-up question about the schools. She asks, do you have any insight into what leverage schools have to make a science-based decision about reopening? The answer is they've got pretty good leverage. The school districts themselves are going to be making these decisions. As I mentioned, we have two kids at home, a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. And I know they're eager to get to third grade and first grade. They want to be safe as well, though. Actually, my son, when he heard the online program was an option, he said, well, is COVID still around? I said, oh, absolutely, COVID's still around. So he's pretty smart for 8, and I think he wants to be safe. But ultimately, as I said, it's up to those local school districts. San Diego Unified, LA Unified, they announced on Monday that they're going to be online only for now. The Orange County Board of Ed, we know, made their recommendation, but a lot of local school districts are not following it. The OC Board of Ed said no masks, no distancing on top of everything else. So not only do they want to bring the schools back, but they want to do so no masks, no distancing, which if you don't give the schools any more money to implement reopening, that's probably about all you can do because all those things that you'd want to do from a public health perspective require money. It's clear that the kind of denying the problem exists and just moving on as we normally would is a recipe for disaster. We've seen that over the last 7 months. Doesn't matter if it's schools or not. Also, the comparisons of some of those countries that have been able to successfully reopen schools don't exactly apply to the U.S. because of the sheer number of cases that we're seeing right now. I think Doctor would know this better than I, but I think over the last week we've had our highest highest days in terms of cases 50, 60,000 cases, every day. We saw 11,000 cases in California today. So we just have to recognize this virus doesn't care about politics. This virus doesn't care about, what part of the state you're from or what political party you're registered to. The virus is going to do what it's going to do. And we better respect the science, and we better respect the virus and act accordingly. The CARES Act, as I mentioned, it would have 13 billion, or excuse me, the CARES Act did have 13 billion. The HEROES Act has an additional 58 billion for K through 12, and that is money that could directly go towards helping those schools. So we passed it in the House, that money that we would need to, potentially reopen schools safely, sitting in the Senate, and we'll see what they come up with next week. Another question from Dave in Vista. I hear people say, but no one I know has the virus. What do I say to them? Dr. Steinberg.
Well, gosh, Dave, I'm going to try to answer that in a polite way. And unfortunately, probably many of us know people who use that kind of sort of dismissive attitude, or, like it can't happen to me, or, almost implying that it's a hoax, or coming right out and saying it. What I would say to those people in as nice a way as you possibly can is, you may not know anybody, but just turn on the news, right? It really doesn't matter what channel you turn it on. No matter how biased your so-called news outlet is, they are going to be reporting on people who have this disease, who have died from this disease, family members, healthcare professionals who have died from it. And, the other thing you might say is, at least based on current trends, hey, just wait a few weeks and you will. So it's hard to imagine that perhaps because of political reasons, naivete or just plain ignorance, that people still, at the point we're at now, after all these months and with things getting worse, are still trying to say, really, it's no big deal. And, why can't we just go about business as usual? And I think the answer should be obvious to anybody who, even spends 5 minutes watching the news or looking at actual statistics online. So just try not to be, I think most people are coming from a place of trying to do what they think is right. And while it might be hard for a reasonable person to figure out why a person would say that, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt and try to address these things in a positive way, as opposed to saying, are you a freaking idiot? Or, that doesn't seem to help that much. Once in a while, I can't help myself, and that's how I handle it. But usually I try to seek common ground and, go to truth and facts and how can we do the most good for the most people. So I think if we try to handle it from there, I hope things work out a little better.
Karl, we gotta kill them with kindness. That's how we gotta do it. We got just the facts. Lead with the facts, but appreciate it. Lancy in Oceanside says the Trump administration and ICE have recently made efforts to strip the visas of international students in order to force the reopening of universities. What is your opinion on this attack to our education and health and safety in the midst of a pandemic? Well, Lancy, this is incredibly important. And just, I guess, recap and provide some perspective. It was beginning of the month that Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, ICE, announced that international students taking online course loads at universities can't remain in the U.S. And really didn't make much sense when you consider the contributions being made by international students at our schools. So I joined, and many others, many of my colleagues in the House Judiciary Committee, we wrote ICE, we wrote DHS, and we said, don't do this. And we asked a series of questions asking for more information. And I just, like so many of my colleagues, believe this was very detrimental to our students and to our universities. And the administration, I think, heard that overwhelming backlash from a wide variety of stakeholders and recently agreed to reverse course on this. And they rolled back the rules, and they will not force students who are online only to leave the country. And that's welcome news. That's good news. But we'll continue to keep a close eye on this, and we'll act accordingly. But I'm very grateful that they decided to roll it back. I wish they hadn't done it in the first place. Michael in Rancho Mission Viejo asks, what is the Congress doing to ensure the integrity of the November presidential election? Wow, great question. He also says the Trump administration is stifling the Postal Service's funding. Very true. How will you make sure that the post office will have capacity to handle absentee ballots? Several things, Michael. First, you should know that late last year, we passed something called the SHIELD Act to combat foreign interference in our elections, close loopholes that allow foreign spending in our elections, boost disclosure and transparency requirements, and create a duty to report illicit offers of campaign assistance from foreign nations or governments. So we need for Senate Republicans to finally hold a vote on the SHIELD Act, and the American people need to know that they have failed to do so. That's one of those that's sitting in the Mitch McConnell graveyard, as they say. We need to keep the pressure on for the SHIELD Act. The other thing is, you talk about the U.S. Postal Service. I absolutely agree. It's critically important. We've got over 600,000 Americans that work at the Postal Service, over 100,000 of whom are veterans. Postal Service delivers 48% of the mail in the world. Life-saving medications, all of the VA's medicine goes through the USPS. And there's been attacks on it now for some time. In 2006, there was a law that was signed by George W. Bush that made it much harder for the Postal Service to remain financially solvent. And all these years later, after that law, which capped revenues, raised expenses for pre-funding pension obligations, and now with the pandemic, $13 billion of additional financial difficulty has put the U.S. Postal Service near financial insolvency. So I led a letter, 137 of my colleagues signed on to provide a $25 billion lifeline to the USPS for the near term. In the long term, we've got to work together and make sure that the USPS remains financially solvent. So I'm going to keep pushing for the short-term help and the long-term structural fixes that are needed to keep the USPS solvent. Thank you for that excellent question. Douglas in Del Mar has one. This is more of a medical question for you, doctor. In addition to isolating as much as possible, wearing a mask and staying 6 feet from people when we do go out, what more can we do to get transmission of the coronavirus under control in our district and throughout California?
Sure. And it's mostly just kind of common sense stuff, right? Wash your hands a lot. Don't touch your face. Stay home as much as you can. If you have to go out, try not to be indoors around other people. Don't be around people who are sick. If you feel sick, definitely don't go out. I mean, those are the basic public health recommendations. And if you are going to be around sick people, or obviously if you're a healthcare professional, it's good to wear a medical mask, particularly like an N95 mask if you have access to that.
Thank you for that. Manny asks, is the House doing something to rectify the critical supply chain situation? We should never, ever be caught relying on foreign countries for critical items like medical equipment, PPE, medicines, strategic metals, electronics, hardware, etc. Manny, you are absolutely correct. And yes, my colleagues and I are working on this supply chain issue. It's been a deep concern of mine since the beginning of this pandemic. And we have repeatedly and consistently called on this president to fully use the Defense Production Act. And for whatever reason, he has failed to do that. He's invoked it to a limited degree, but we really need it to address supply shortages across the board. And the HEROES Act has a number of provisions that would help. And specifically, it would expand the use and oversight of the Defense Production Act to do the following: increase the production and supply of critical medical supplies and equipment, such as diagnostic tests and PPE, focus efforts on supply chain mobilization, decrease the disruption of critical deliveries to state and local governments, and require assessments for both immediate and longer-term needs, as well as requiring longer-term planning to ensure that the United States is better prepared for future pandemics. The other thing I will say is one of my great colleagues, Alyssa Slotkin, has led an effort to get more of that logistics planning under the auspices of the Department of Defense, as opposed to HHS and other agencies. I think that would be definitely worth exploring as well. Thank you for the question. Virginia in Oceanside says, my question is about the railroad through Del Mar that needs to be moved or raised as it's too close to the ocean and the cliff is crumbling. How is that project coming along? Virginia, thank you for that question. I can tell you we've been working very hard on it. In fact, I will be attending a meeting later this afternoon, in fact, right after this town hall, on that very topic. The Low Sun Rail Corridor between LA and San Diego is one of the most strategically important in the U.S., and right in the middle of that corridor, the Del Mar Bluffs are in real trouble. We did get $11.5 million from the Department of Transportation for some short-term fixes. That'll help with subsurface drainage, concrete channels, storm drains, support piles, and I'm going to keep fighting for more. I'm happy to announce that the Army Corps authorized additional federal investment in the language of the recently released Water Resources Development Act, also known as WRDA. And that's a big step forward. And if we get that passed, which I really hope we do in the weeks ahead, Congress will have officially authorized the feasibility study for that project. And we're going to need a lot more help. And I'm committed to doing everything we can to bring that help to fruition. Kathleen asks, I am very, very concerned about evictions. I know you and the Congress have done so much in this area and that the Senate is the problem, but the present situation is so grave. Is there anything you can do to spearhead a plan to help your constituents? Well, first of all, I completely agree and share your concern. This is getting very dire. I've seen the eviction rates as well as the mortgage delinquency rates, which we're now really just starting to get a picture of. It is not a good picture at all, and we're going to have to do quite a bit more to help. I was glad to see Governor Newsom with the enforcement of eviction orders to make sure that those impacted by COVID-19 are not evicted. The CARES Act did have a number of things, the forbearance provisions of the CARES Act, which did help. But again, as we've said, when we passed the CARES Act, we did not believe that months later we'd still be in exactly the same spot or potentially worse, depending on your perspective. And right now, there are still other protections. Renters in California can't be evicted because the Judicial Council has issued emergency rules banning courts from processing evictions and foreclosures until 90 days after the governor ends the state of emergency. And in addition to that, in the HEROES Act, we have $100 billion of rental assistance. So one of the things I'll be looking at from the Senate package next week is to see whether they have the rental assistance that we need to try to stem the tide of these evictions. Very, very scary situation. Impossible to shelter in place if you don't have a shelter at all. So we've got to do all we can to keep people in their homes, keep people in their apartments during this difficult time. Murray asks, it's well understood that COVID-19 results in far higher morbidity and mortality in people with comorbidities like obesity, smoking, hypertension, and diabetes. What can you do? What can small businesses do? And how can I help encourage people to do the patriotic things we need to win this war? Quit smoking. Know and manage your blood pressure carefully. Exercise. Maintain a normal body weight. Socially distance and wear a mask. Good advice. I like that. I think he has the medical advice down. But Dr. Steinberg, do you want to address that?
Yeah. Wow. What a great question, Murray. Thank you for that nice slow pitch that I can now hit out of the park. And I agree with you. I think those are really patriotic things that you mentioned. I think things that we can do that protect the safety and the health of others are truly patriotic. We care about our fellow Americans, however misguided some of their behavior and some of their thinking may be right now. And I appreciate your question. So I think first and foremost, we can lead by example, right? We can do things ourselves, do esteemable things, and we will be held in esteem, right? We wear a mask. We take good care of ourselves physically. We don't smoke. And I think by doing that, that can serve as an example to others. But we can encourage others to do things, but without shaming them, right? Because sometimes that can do more harm than good if somebody feels like they're being judged, I guess. So it's easy to understand during these really stressful times where somebody might indulge in unhealthy behaviors like smoking or like alcohol and other substance use in an unhealthy way. or even not exercising. But on the other hand, a lot of people have more time on their hands than they normally would. And this is time that could be spent doing things that are healthy, even if it's just an outdoor walk or other types of physical exercise. So I think it's also a time that we can take care of our mental health. We can, clean house. We can go through old stuff. We can read, do some pleasure reading and things like that are good for our mental health. Maybe spend a little bit less time on social media and watching the news, although it's important to know what's going on, I think. But I think for your own circle of family and friends, the more you can do to just serve as an example, the better. And as an employer, I think if you are fortunate enough to be in that capacity, I think doing things like providing healthy snacks for employees, obviously in the workplace, ensure that all customers and all employees observe masking and social distancing, hand washing, disinfection, and those types of things. Giving people break time to do something healthy, like go take a 15-minute walk. Those are the types of things that I think will patriotically serve as an example and help improve the health of our fellow Americans. So thanks for the great question.
Well, I certainly can relate to all that you just said. I think those are all great things to do, even if we didn't have a pandemic, and all the more important now. And if you ever wanted to quit smoking, man, now is a good time to quit smoking. I tell you, I hate smoking. Two of my grandfathers, both my grandfathers died of emphysema, one of emphysema, one of lung cancer. So don't smoke, and you'll be less likely to get COVID on top of it. And in Carlsbad asked, why aren't the local police enforcing the governor's mask mandate? Great question, Ann. And it's been really a mixed bag. It's largely up to our local law enforcement to make a determination of how they're going to take action against those that aren't in compliance. Governor Newsom and the Department of Public Health updated their guidance to mandate that face coverings be worn statewide when individuals are in high-risk situations like public indoor spaces, public transportation, or interacting with individuals outside of your household. It has exceptions, though, for persons younger than 2, those with a medical condition, mental health condition, or disability that prevents wearing a face covering. So under California law, these state public health officers' orders are enforceable by county sheriffs and other local police agencies. And people who fail to comply can be charged with a misdemeanor. But again, those enforcement decisions are made by those local officials. And specifically to Carlsbad, since you live in Carlsbad, on their website, they say the police department is taking an education-first approach, meaning people will be first informed about the new rules and given an opportunity to comply. If needed, police can issue citations for noncompliance. The city has also put in monitors at parks and beaches to help inform people about the rules and is distributing free face coverings at public locations to increase compliance. Monica asks, what can you do to make sure people, especially tourists, are following guidelines like wearing masks and social distancing? Information, I think, is critically important. And my great hope would be that, we've now done 31 of these town halls. We've tried as best we can to get the word out. I hope that people are listening. I know that Dr. Steinberg said don't pay too much attention to the news, but hopefully enough to know the overwhelming evidence that wearing masks will help us get through this pandemic, will reduce the rate of community spread, will keep us safe, and more importantly, will keep others safe. Again, because the disease can be transmitted asymptomatically. But I do know that the San Diego Tourism Authority is sharing public health guidance, encouraging travelers to follow. There's the guidance of what they call a safe travel pledge. And I'll tell you, I just had a tourism roundtable with many of our local community leaders, and I was very grateful to have a lot of participation. And they're trying to spread that word however they can. To remind people of those public health recommendations. So it is critically important that we do that. We are just about out of time, but I wanted to make sure to give both Sudershan and Dr. Steinberg some time for closing remarks. And since Sudershan went first before, I will have Dr. Steinberg go first now. And hopefully, doctor, by the time I see you next, things will have calmed down, but it's very unpredictable. So hopefully we will have a better week this next week. But what do you expect, and what closing advice and words do you have for our audience today?
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Congressman. I would say probably the biggest thing that's changed in the last week since our last town hall is that the testing supplies are really slender now. And so whereas before you could just sign up and go to one of the county drive-through sites and get tested just because you wanted to know and contribute to sort of epidemiological knowledge, that is no longer the case. And so in fact, what I've been hearing from some of the local health systems is that if somebody in your family that lives in the household with you is positive for COVID and you get sick, they say, don't come in for testing, just assume you're positive. So it's unfortunate, but in any event, if you think you might have it or you want to be tested, call first. Don't just show up because you may unfortunately not qualify for testing, as pathetic as that seems in this day and age and at this point in this pandemic. Other than that, I just reiterate that it's a marathon, not a sprint. Thanks for being patient. Thanks for being kind. And, looking out for the welfare of others, especially those who are, compromised by other comorbid conditions and who are at high risk for severe consequences or death from this illness. And, people who are selfish and for whatever reason don't want to comply, if there's a way to call them out that doesn't put you at risk, please do. And honestly, I think if the local law enforcement were handing out $500 citations for this, A, it would help the public coffers, and B, it might serve as an extra, instead of just the carrot of being a good person, it would be a nice stick to beat people into doing the right thing. Anyway, thanks for having me, and have a great week, and have a safe trip to D.C., Congressman, and thanks for all the work you're doing.
Well, thank you, Dr. Steinberg. It is always an honor to have you. I'm so grateful to you for being with us for 10 of these town halls. Truly remarkable to have your participation and to have you share your knowledge and experience with our constituents. So truly grateful. And, what can I say? We thank you for everything. I'd now like to turn it over to Sudershan from the SBDC. Again, this is a very difficult time for our small businesses. I'm very grateful that you have joined us, and I'd love if you could provide some closing comments and also just let our audience know how they can contact you for the services that their business may need.
Thank you, Congressman. So I'll start with the last thing first. So if you need to contact the Small Business Development Center, please go to our website, and that is www.sdivsbdc. So it stands for San Diego Imperial Valley Small Business Development Center, the first letter of each word, San Diego Imperial Valley SBDC, SDIVSBDC.org. And you can take a look at all the services that we offer. But more than anything else, I would say two things. Please take advantage of these services you really have paid for through our tax dollars, right? We provide these services at no charge because we're funded by the federal government and the state of California and our college. So take advantage of all those services as you try and ride out and overcome all the things that COVID has created from a negative economic impact point of view. So we will help you. We'll sit down with you. We'll rethink with you and have you put down your thoughts on how you want to overcome this challenge in a document which you can follow. And once again, services by professionals, confidentially provided at no charge. The one other thing I would say is I talked to many small business owners who have kept their businesses open, but they too are concerned about individuals refusing to wear masks and becoming angry and hostile towards the business owner or to any other customer who might be in a store and ask them to wear a mask. So any kind of enforcement would help a lot and take the burden off the small business owner. So please reach out to us. Thank you, Congressman, for all you're doing, and just a pleasure being with you.
Well, the pleasure is ours, Sudershan, and thank you for all your great work on behalf of our small business community. I want to thank you both again for joining us. I want to thank all of our wonderful team, our official staff, Chief of Staff Kara, our Communications Director Eric, our wonderful legislative staff for all their hard work, our district office team, Francine and Kyle, and really the whole team in Oceanside and Dana Point, and our wonderful teleconferencing, video conferencing expert, Jeremy, now for his 31st one of these that we've done. Super grateful to our amazing staff, and also wanted to thank our viewers. And whether you watched us today on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or via our website, I'm really glad that you joined us. I hope it was informative. I hope that everyone continues to stay healthy and safe as possible during this crazy time. Please follow those guidelines from the CDC and the State Department of Public Health in our counties. Wear those masks, socially distance, wash your hands. So all those things we know work to help prevent community spread. Let's be good and decent people to one another. Let's exercise common sense, and let's make sure that we're taking care of those who need our help the most. So until then, we'll see you next week.